I think Oregon beats Maryland big. I think the defense is why.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Something as simple as Oregon over Maryland on the money line. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I'll give my three keys to getting an easy win. Will we finally see a tight end touchdown? All the important questions coming up here on today's show. But the reason I like Oregon's defense on this spot is twofold. Number one, for Maryland, their offensive line has struggled. And Jordan Burch played last week. I think his snap count was around 30, 35, probably working himself back into the rotation. I think we can see a better version of Jordan Burch. He made some impact plays. Didn't always show up on the box score necessarily, but I thought he did well against Michigan. Derek Harmon's just a beast. Mateo is awesome. And when those three guys are out there with Jamari Caldwell and the rotating guys like Tatum Tuioti and Amarion Winston, they're really, really good. So of 134 FBS teams, according to Pro Football Focus, the Maryland offensive line is 128th in pass blocking. That's not good for a team that doesn't run the ball a whole heck of a lot, which Maryland doesn't, and wants to throw it a lot. And they're certainly capable. Felton at wide receiver, he's really good. Interested to see if Jabbar Muhammad follows him around. But I think that for Oregon's defensive line, they have the ability to just completely take over this game and make it feel kind of like UCLA, where it's just a struggle for them to move the ball up and down the field because the quarterbacks don't have enough time. There is not a single offensive lineman. And look, Pro Football Focus, not a be-all, end-all. For example, Marcus Harper, who's not expected to play in this game, I think PFF has given him way too low of a grade. But there is some merit to the numbers that they put out. They're looking at every single snap and grading based on various metrics. Maryland doesn't have a single offensive lineman this year with the necessary snap count to be considered someone who's played a meaningful number of snaps. They don't have a single lineman with a grade of 70 or above. And 70 is solid. 80 is really good. 90 is hard to come by at any position. And that means you're one of the highest graded guys in their entire network. So they don't have a single player that you look at and say is average, above average, or doing well to hold his own. And against this Oregon defensive line, I just don't think that's going to go very well. And I'm curious to see how much Oregon blitzes in this game, if at all. I mean, they'll blitz every now and then. They'll have some simulated pressures. But if Oregon can just get pressure with 4, that's a defensive coordinator's dream. Is, hey, they're going to have to protect with 5 or 6 just to block 4 guys, or at the very least, they'll have to keep a running back in, if not an extra tight end, and chip guys here and there. When you can just drop 7 into coverage against 3 or 4 guys running routes, that's a pretty ideal situation. So I think you could see a lot of base defense from Oregon this week if their defensive line finds success early. You'll still see Brandon Johnson come on a blitz, or Dante Manning, Jeff Bossa, Bryce Betcher. Like, those guys have blitzed this year and had a good amount of success, but I think this is a big week for Oregon's defensive line. And so you don't just have the offensive line struggles for Maryland, but you have a back and forth at the quarterback position. Like, they had 2 guys play against Minnesota last week because their starter wasn't playing exceptionally well. That's just not the situation you want to be in against an Oregon defense that, as I have repeated a lot, and everydayers might be tired of hearing me say, I'm not tired of saying it though, because it's a great thing to be able to say about the Oregon defense. Through 9 games, they've only allowed over 200 passing yards once, and that was to Will Howard in Ohio State. And this Maryland receiving core probably... it's probably on par, I'd say, with UCLA's when the Bruins actually have time to throw. UCLA's been playing better football over the last couple of weeks, which surprises me because I don't think they're that good. But Oregon made them look really, really bad in that game many weeks ago in Los Angeles. But they have a good receiving core. J. Michael Sturdivant, good player. Logan Loya, good player. They had the other a young guy who's really coming on, our old friend Maliki Matavau at tight end. I think other than Ohio State, this is the best receiving core that or passing game on the whole. I thought Illinois' passing game was solid, capable, couple of good receivers with Zachary Franklin and Pat Bryant. But I think this test will be the second best passing attack and wide receiving core that Oregon has seen this year. But I think the defensive line is just poised to really, really have a big day, as I mentioned. But when you're going back and forth with quarterbacks, it's just not the place you want to be. It's really not the place you want to be against this Oregon defense that held Michigan to 4 of 12 on third down a week ago and 0 for 1 on fourth down. That was late in the game when the Wolverines tried the trick play, which, as we heard on Ducks versus them, Tosh Lupoi knew right away once they put Alex Orji in the game. And then cornerback Mateo Uiagalelei covered him as he released out the backside on the end-around pass. But there were a couple of third and longs that Michigan converted that they just haven't really done consistently this year. I think Oregon can clean those up and be even better on third down. I forget which game it was specifically, but they've held a team to like 1 of 11, 1 of 12 on third down. It might have been Purdue. I'd have to go back and double check, but I think you could have that sort of game if Oregon plays to their full potential on the defensive side of the ball. It's crazy that we're already at the point in the season where there are only 2 games left at Austin Stadium, but after the road trip to Michigan and how that game went, I think the defense, even though they played well against Wolverines, is going to have an extra level of motivation to play even better this week and get off the field on third and longs. I think it'll be a more solid test for Oregon secondary. You know, Colston Loveland was really the only guy that could do anything for Michigan. They couldn't shut him down, but they still held the Michigan offense mostly in check. But I think if that defensive line starts to enforce their will up front, it's just really hard to throw the ball in this Oregon defense. So I like Oregon big. I've got them winning 38-7. And I think there will be a couple drives where Maryland moves the ball down the field, completes a couple of passes, maybe gets into field goal range. But like the Purdue game, I think the Oregon defense is going to be able to stiffen in those particular spots. I think you'll see a sack or two that might move Maryland out of field goal range. They just don't have a lot of confidence in their offensive line. Doesn't sound like they should. And I've got all the confidence in the world in this Oregon defensive line. On the other side in the trenches, Marcus Harper not expected to play in this game. I'm more than a little interested to see how it plays out. The betting favorite, there isn't actually one. I mean, FanDuel's got a lot of stuff, but I don't think they have this. On who would start for Oregon, probably Kavika Rogers. He was the guy first off the bench against Michigan, played a dozen snaps, had some good moments, but also had some really tough ones when going against Mason Graham. Maryland doesn't have NFL guys littered across the front 4. So if he is a starter, I'd expect he has a better game than he did last week. But I'm curious to see if Davey Uli plays as well, because he was a full participant at practice, according to my guy Eric Scopel, 24/7 Sports, who saw some reps take place. Also, I think Shaq McCroy was listed on the 2 deep. So he came out of high school, was a tackle. He might be the biggest person. I think him and Terrence Green, I think McCroy is like 6'8", 350, he's just a monstrous kid. Brian Smith, our Locked On recruiting insider at the network, said he's the biggest kid he's ever seen in person at 18 years old, and maybe we see him in this game. There should be an opportunity to get some second stringers out there. I would love to see Shaq McCroy just to see how he looks on the field against a Power 4 team, if nothing else. But curious to see what they do at that right guard position and how they hold up. But I've got Oregon winning big. And my keys to the game, pretty simple. There are some similarities to previous weeks, but there's one in particular that stands out against this Maryland defense that if Oregon adheres to, they'll ensure they get a big win, and we might see Dante Moore, Austin Novosad at the end of the game. Those keys are coming up next. First, let's talk about LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. 2.5 million small businesses, they're using LinkedIn for hiring with good reason. They know where their bread is buttered. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Key number 1 to getting a comfortable win against Maryland is protecting the football and protecting Dillon Gabriel. Sure, that's technically 2 keys, but they fall into the same vein. So let's start with the first half of that, not turning the football over. This Maryland defense has not been great this season statistically, but the one area where they can get you a little bit is in the turnover department. They have recovered 6 fumbles and they have picked off opponents 9 times this year. So through 8 games, they're averaging about 2 takeaways per game. They're one of the 25 or 30 best or so in the entire country in that department. That has been how their defense has found success. If you are able to not give them the football or give them opportunities to make plays, they have struggled. There are a lot of young guys on that side of the ball, as Trey Moore of Locked On Terps talked about on yesterday's show. I've heard that elsewhere as well, that they're working in some young guys there. They don't have a lot of high-end talent or guys that they could send to the NFL draft yet, and that they've just struggled in coverage this year. Even without Tez Johnson, this is a really dangerous Oregon receiving corps. I think Evan Stewart could be in for a really big game, but you can't turn the football over. And if you don't, Maryland's defense just hasn't been able to hold up statistically this year. They're giving up almost 28 points per game. Only 105 of those rushing yards are on the ground, but 275 yards that they give up per game are through the air. So if you give Dillon Gabriel time, which is the second part of this particular key to the game, if you keep Dillon Gabriel off of the ground, and Maryland's been okay rushing the passer this year, he's going to pick apart this Maryland defense. And I think when Gabriel has thrown interceptions, which we haven't really seen a lot in the last few games, not since the Michigan State outing several weeks ago. Gosh, that feels like a lifetime ago. And it was just a handful of weeks. Time flies when you're having fun. Oregon's 9-0, ranked number 1, so it has indeed been fun to this point. But Gabriel's only thrown 1 interception since then on the unnecessary deep shot taken against Illinois. The game was already well in hand at that point early in the fourth quarter. And in the first half, in that Illinois game, for instance, when Gabriel had a bunch of time to throw, they dropped 8 in coverage and the offensive line just protected. They didn't hold. And Gabriel just got to sit, pat the ball, look. He found Tez Johnson, catch and run for a long touchdown. Now, Tez, of course, not there this week. But if you keep Dillon Gabriel upright, he showed last week he can still create explosives to Evan Stewart and Trayshawn Holden. He can work in Justice Lowe. But when you don't have your leading receiver in both in all 3 of the categories of receptions, yards, and touchdowns this year, there is an adjustment. And you want to make that adjustment however small, as easy as possible. And I think last week, Oregon's offensive line did a good job. There were no sacks in that game. I've talked about how Dillon Gabriel was responsible for that as well, with his movement in the pocket and getting away from potential sacks. He should have more time this week. And if he does, first full game without Tez Johnson, allow him to settle in and get used to that, whatever difference that is for him at the quarterback position. I think that's a big key for the Ducks. So those 2 things kind of make up one unified key of keeping it safe. Keep Dillon Gabriel off the ground, keep the ball out of harm's way, and this offense should have no problem going up and down the field. Key number 2, take away Ty Felton. This is a guy who is already approaching a 1,000-yard season, and Maryland has played 8 games so far this year. Oregon's played 9. Maryland's already had both their byes, so they've only played 8, and Felton has got over 900 yards receiving this season. For reference, Tez Johnson is over 600, but I think he's 649 or so with 8 touchdowns. Felton is a guy who can torch you, and I'm really interested to see how much trust they have, because this is different than Ohio State, where you've got 3 receivers that on any given play can just beat a DB, make a catch, make a contested catch, take the top off of defense, whatever you need them to do. Carnell Tate is a really high-level number 3. Abuka is probably the best number 2 receiver in the country, could be a number 1 on a lot of teams, and Jeremiah Smith, the true freshman, is utterly fantastic. So when you have that sort of matchup, it makes sense that you don't have a corner shadow a particular wide receiver. I mean, Brandon Johnson matched up with Jeremiah Smith sometimes. Nico Reed matched up with Smith. Jabbar Muhammad matched up with him. They just played their spots and said, okay, well, we'll just defend whichever receiver comes over to this side. For this Maryland receiving corps, they've got a couple of guys, and with the way they can throw the football, certainly Caden Prather is capable, but he's got just over half of the receiving yardage that Ty Felton has had this year. Felton's got 73 receptions, and Prather's the next closest with 45. So whoever's been playing quarterback, Ty Felton, number 10, that's been the go-to for this Terps offense. So I don't know if they shadow Jabbar Muhammad, or if they have Jabbar Muhammad shadow him rather, or if they say, no, we trust Brandon Johnson if they want to put him in the slot, we trust Nico Reed if he goes to the other side, that'd be my guess, because all those guys have played really well this year. Nico Reed in particular, I think has just had a phenomenal season and would be in the running right now. I'll talk about this during the bye week in 2 weeks' time. Most improved player from a season ago, Nico Reed would have to be near the top of that list, if not at the top of it. There are other candidates to be sure, but he'd be up there for me. I'm interested to see how they play that. They probably don't travel a defensive back, but Muhammad's moved around a little bit. He's played in the slot or even over the top at safety at times this year. I think taking away Ty Felton and holding him under 70 yards receiving will make it at least a little bit more challenging for whoever's playing quarterback for the Terrapins here. And then key number 3 is don't allow the big plays. This is a team in Maryland that wants to throw the football, hasn't been spectacular running the ball so far this season. 119 yards per game on the ground, not a great number from an offensive standpoint. It'd be all right if it were defensive, but offensively, that's not great. I don't know that Maryland has played a team that can run the ball as well as Oregon can at times this year. I mean, they went for 175 last week against Michigan on the road. And week by week, the rushing totals that Maryland has allowed: 88 against UConn, 121 against Michigan State, 123 against Virginia, 75 against Villanova, 151 against Indiana, 80 to Northwestern, 81 to USC, and 123 to Minnesota. I think Minnesota is the best rushing team in that particular list. I think you'd put Michigan State maybe in there as well, but this is a different caliber of offensive line, even without Marcus Harper. I feel good about that unit up front. We'll see who replaces him and how well they're able to gel without their starting right guard from the last 7 games now, 7, 6, however many they've officially made the shift for. Time just is all a blur in a social construct at this point. But I think that if Oregon limits the explosive plays and makes Maryland go down the field and be disciplined to go for 5-yard plays or take a few yards here, I don't think they're going up and down the field running the football. They want to go up and down, throwing it all around the yard, and that's a much more difficult thing to do, right? It's reminiscent of the Oregon game against Idaho, where Gabriel completes 41 passes for 380 yards and 2 touchdowns, but everything was kind of dink and dunk. Is this Maryland offense that might go back and forth with quarterbacks disciplined enough? Are they efficient enough to have those sorts of drives and sustain them against this Oregon defense? I doubt it, especially at Autzen Stadium. So I think if you take away explosive plays, make them move down the field with the lack of a running game, I don't think that plays into what Maryland wants to do offensively. So those are the 3 keys to getting an easy win here. And if Oregon goes 0 for 3 on those keys, they can still win the football game because they just have a lot more talent than Maryland. But I think if Oregon cruises and is able to get some second unit guys in by the fourth quarter, as they have other times this year, like against Illinois and Purdue, if they protect the football in Dillon Gabriel, shut down Ty Felton, or at least contain him to well under 100 yards and don't allow big plays, I think Oregon will win this football game. You do 2 of those 3 keys, Oregon will win pretty close to the final score prediction that I've got, which is Ducks 38, Maryland 7. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. Are we going to see something that we haven't seen all year long? I mean, we could. It's possible. That's coming up next. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. And this episode is offered to you by our friends over at FanDuel. That is America's #1 sportsbook. Oregon, 24.5, 25-point favorite. They can cover that number. Rain or shine, they can cover that particular number. And right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. You can go bet Oregon money line, which is all but a lock, and you get 150 in bonus bets once the Ducks win the football game. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Before I get to the tight ends, I wanted to finish up talking about Dillon Gabriel because I don't think this is a big test for Gabriel per se, though it will be raining, potentially. It never rains at Autzen Stadium, obviously. Sometimes it does, every now and then. Don't tell anybody I said that. I said it publicly, so what does it matter at this point anyway? But I think that's half test number one, and half test number two is what does it look like for 4 quarters without Tez Johnson? We saw 3.5 against Michigan without Tez Johnson. It looked pretty good. Looked pretty darn good. And this Maryland defense is not at that sort of level. I think you can readily argue that the rain is a bigger test than not having Tez Johnson because of how much success he had last week. But I think this is, not the, hey, prove it moment or have your Heisman game here at Dillon Gabriel or anything like that. But there are a couple of things that he's battling in this game, where he can show Oregon fans, again, that they should have full faith and confidence in him because doesn't have his top receiver, might rain a little bit, and they've got to change that offensive line. And as important as it is for Kavika Rogers or Dave Iuli to play well at that right guard position, it's just as important for Dillon Gabriel to make sure the communication is set across the board and that they don't have any mishaps or lapses and they get into the right plays and that everything stays continuous, that the continuity of communication remains. There's a good alliteration for you. The continuity of communication. I'm way, way too proud of myself for that one. But anyway, I think those are just little things that I'm watching for with Gabriel. How do you handle this? How do you handle that? How do you handle this other thing as well? So I think this will be a good game for Dillon Gabriel. Don't know if he goes for 350 and 3 touchdowns if Oregon is able to run the football, because when it starts to get raining a little bit, coach is going to want to run the ball because it turns out it's harder to throw in the rain, but we'll see what kind of weather he actually has to deal with here. But I got a question. I got this question. Zach sent one in, and you can always send one in as well. YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter, or become a Locked On Ducks insider. You get priority access in the mailbag and a bunch of other perks as well. That link in the description below. You can get a free 14-day trial. Zach asked me if a tight end will finally score a touchdown this year. Did you know that tight ends have not scored a touchdown? They have not had one rushing. They have not had one receiving. I don't know why I started with rushing there. They have not picked the ball up in the end zone. Nothing. As involved as they have been, this is the most tight end involved offense with this level of a passing attack that I can remember Oregon ever having. They legitimately use 3 tight ends regularly in a variety of ways. Screen passes to Sadiq. There's going to be a pump and go on a Kenyon Sadiq screen pass look in this game. That is my early tight end prediction, is that play will show up this week. But this week, next week, Washington game, I don't know. At some point, defensive coordinators are going to key in on the fact that, hey, 18's in the game in the slot. They're going to throw the screen. Now, last game, Michigan maybe keyed on that a bit, and then he ran a vertical route up the seam, and Gabriel hit him for a big chunk play. So they can't do it every time. But still, that play is coming at some point. I don't know when Will Stein's going to call that. But will they get in the end zone this week? I don't know. I don't know. You look at what Oregon does in the red zone, and what is the first thing you want to do? You want to run it. Of course you want to run it. And when you have a quarterback like Dillon Gabriel who can move around a little bit, the speed option they had that turned into a forward pass against Illinois, they've had a lot of success with those sorts of plays. And if they can just run it in, especially when it's wet, I don't know that this would be the game. They tried to get Patrick Herbert the touchdown against Ohio State. Sadiq has been close. T-Ferg almost had one last week. He got to the 1-yard line on the scramble drill. Play that was really well defended by Michigan, but well improvised by Gabriel and Ferguson. It was that tight end delay release across the field. Oregon's been running it for the last 3 years, and Michigan was in zone, so they sat on it perfectly, and T-Ferg recognized it. He ran with Gabriel the other way, exit out the side door, and boom, he gets down to the 1-yard line, and then Noah Whittington punched it in. So I feel like there's going to be a tight end touchdown at some point. I just don't know if it'll be this week, because I think with the rain factor, Oregon might be slightly more inclined to want to run the football down inside the 5-yard line, depending on how hard it's raining and such. But at some point, There'll be a 14 personnel where it's jumbo, no wide receivers, one back, four tight ends. They go heavy play action, and a tight end leaks out the backside as the only route, as the only option there, and he's open for a touchdown. So those are my two predictions. Either this week or next week, we're going to see a fake screen to Sadiq that they at the very least try, and a tight end will score. Either this week or next week on a 14 jumbo heavy play action. And I've got Oregon winning 38-7. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, go Ducks.